I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. In recent years, New York has increased state funding for victim services, lifted caps on certain reimbursable expenses for crime victims, and made it easier to file victim compensation claims. But as part of National Crime Victims Week earlier this spring, the Senate Republicans highlighted a package of bills designed to further improve services and supports for crime victims in New York. For more on their agenda, we're joined in the studio by State Senator Dean Murray, a Long Island Republican who is the ranking GOP member for the Chamber's Crime Victims Committee. So there are a lot of ways to approach something like support for crime victims, and I know that Senate Republicans held roundtables all over the state to solicit some sort of feedback from both law enforcement and impacted families and individuals on what they would like to see prioritized. What was some of the feedback you got?
In addition to talking to DAs, law enforcement, victim services, we spoke to victims, actual victims and loved ones of murdered victims. And so when we talk about things like victim services and compensation and all of that, yes, we've done things to work on that. But where we fail is actually listening to them. We pass legislation that very much impacts them, but we don't think about it. We're thinking about the criminal and the impact to them. Oh, they want to get out on parole earlier, or they want to earn time, or this time, or that time. Every time you're shortening that sentence, it affects the victims. And we just don't, that doesn't seem to factor in. And that's the strongest message we heard is, hey, can we please be heard and not forgotten? And we forget them right now. We really do.
What do you think is the right balance when considering the emotions of crime victims and their families? Because from one end of the spectrum, I could imagine people saying, this is the aggrieved party, we need to hear what they have to say, and we need to the best of our abilities, execute what they're looking for. At the same time, though, this is an emotional situation and probably not a time when someone is a dispassionate observer. So how do you balance that and the needs of, say, society versus the needs of the individual?
Sure, and it is a balancing act because at the same time, you want justice. But if we can rehabilitate someone and make them a productive member of society, a law-abiding member of society, great, depending on the crime. So there are so many different factors. I think this is the one area where there is no cookie-cutter answer. There are so many factors that have to go into play. I'll give you an example. So when we talk about parole, a lot of people have the misconception that parole means they've served their time. That's not what it means. It means they're going to serve their time outside of prison. They still have to finish serving their time.
I mean, they're serving a bare minimum that a judge has recommended.
Right.
Sure.
So you get released on parole. You are on parole for now a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. So you're still serving your sentence. You're just doing it outside of prison and under supervision. A lot of people think, oh, they've served their time, leave them alone. No, they haven't. They're not done. So let's keep that in mind. When they go for parole, if they're denied, they want to obviously go back before the board as quickly as possible. But what they're forgetting is there are victims who every time they're up for parole, they have to show up. They have to give their testimony. They have to relive that crime over and over again. And this can go on for years and years depending on the crime.
Do they have to show up? I mean, they have an option, I imagine.
They have an option, but if you're a victim and you had a loved one murdered, I will pretty much guarantee you want to show up and you want to keep them in prison.
Although we have heard various accounts. I mean, as you pointed out, there is no cookie-cutter response. And some people have varying takes on how they want to see an assailant or perpetrator handled.
Absolutely. And sometimes they'll show up to say just that, hey, you know what, I've forgiven, let's move on. Most of the time it's not. But the point is, we want to make sure the victim has the right to be heard. And if they are to be heard, they have to do it over and over again. And it's not like they wake up that morning and go, oh, I think I'll go testify today. They end up reliving the crime over and over again, that pain over and over again. And we just seem to not factor that into the equation. And I think we need to. And that's the big message we heard was, hey, don't forget about us. We still want justice. Everything seems to turn to rehabilitation, which, again, I get it. But don't forget the part about justice. There's a package of bills that the Suffolk District Attorney just held a press conference on saying, don't pass these. These are bad. Things like the Earned Time Act, Fair and Timely Parole, Elder Parole, and the Second Look Act, which is another interesting one. When you look at these and you factor in what it would do, he's naming off Joel Rifkin, Colin Ferguson. You know, these guys, the Tops shooter, Gendron, could be out like in 15 years. You know, Colin Ferguson's already past 55, as is Joel Rifkin. They've already served their time. If this were to pass, they would immediately be up for parole.
Sure, but they wouldn't be
not automatic. It's not
release.
Automatic.
Right.
Well, then again, and one of those bills actually flips how parole is looked at. The prosecution or the other side has to prove why you shouldn't get it.
Sure.
So you're walking in with your automatic parole. So, I mean, we really have to look at these bills when we consider these and not just look about how it's going to impact the criminal, but think about how it's going to impact the victims.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with State Senator Dean Murray, a Long Island Republican. So in terms of legislation that you'd like to see advanced as opposed to the bills that you would hope just go off and die somewhere, what type of proposals would you like to see move through the legislature?
So we put together a package of 5 bills. One of them, I don't know if you've heard the term abatement ab initio.
Let's pretend I haven't.
Okay. So anyone who remembers the Aaron Hernandez case, the New England Patriots tight end, convicted of murder, went to prison, was tried again on another set of murders, was acquitted. But right after that, he ended up committing suicide in jail. The minute he committed suicide, because of abatement ab initio, when someone, because he had filed an appeal and the appeal had not been heard yet, if that case happens, his record is wiped clean. So in other words, his conviction's dropped, it's wiped out, there is no conviction. If you go back and look at the records, it wouldn't appear. So there would be no conviction, no anything. And it was initially, the abatement ab initio is a doctrine across the country. Different states handle it differently. In that case, the Massachusetts courts, they said, wait a minute, that's gone too far. This is way outdated. This was actually, abatement ab initio was set up for tax crimes. And the reason was, if you got convicted and you had to pay back the government and you're in prison and you die, that burden would go to the family. And they said, well, that shouldn't happen. So when the criminal dies, the crime will die. Well, some, I have to say, brilliant defense attorney said, hey, why don't we try it on these crimes? And there were no limitations on it. So now they're using it for murderers, rapists, child molesters, drug dealers, you name it, to wipe their
pending
record clean.
appeals.
Yes, exactly. Now, what bothers me the most about that is on the prosecution side, you have the 2 strikes, you're out. You get 1 shot. If they're acquitted, you can't go back and do it again, no matter what evidence you find. But in this, we're saying you already went through the system, you got your day in court, you were found guilty, you were sentenced, you're in jail, and you took your own life or you died. You got your day in court, just like the prosecution did. They don't get a second bite. We're giving you the appeal, but if you didn't get it, you still got your day in court. That conviction should stand. So I've introduced legislation called Sarah's Law, which applies to the Sarah Good case and her killer. And hopefully that will pass because then it would just simply get rid of abatement ab initio, I would be open to altering it to just go back to being tax or financial cases. But in this case, we think we need that done. So that's one. Another one would be, right now we have domestic violence homicide review teams that issue reports, but we don't have it for anything outside of domestic violence. So I'd like to see the same thing outside of domestic violence for the other homicides. It gives us useful information that both law enforcement and victims advocates can use.
Well, so I get the sort of substantive nature of, say, that second proposal. And the first one seems largely symbolic and about supporting crime victims and having them have that sort of closure with regard to that experience. And I wonder, that seems to be the focus of a lot of Republican efforts, though, this idea of things that could be themed as symbolic or in support of crime victims. Why lean into that stuff as opposed to focusing more on the substantive things like money for crime victims? Because we have seen, say, out of D.C., a drop in federal support for crime victims, or we've seen pardons for people who, led an insurgency on the Capitol. Right. So why not focus more on those more substantive things than those symbolic things?
Please don't take offense when I say this, but this is exactly why we had to do the roundtables, because that is the thought process that, let's make it financial, let's make it... Everything that we heard from these victims is it's not about that. Can you please not ignore us and ignore our feelings and what we're going through? We're suffering. We didn't ask for this. We're the victim. We didn't ask for any of this. Don't forget about us once the crime is done. And that's what it feels like it is. So when you say symbolic, it's not symbolic to them. It's very real. It's them being heard. It's them being recognized by the state, by the government, by us. It's them having a voice. And to them, many of them, that's more important than getting that compensation or something. They need to them, they don't feel like they have a seat at the table. Once the crime's committed, they're forgotten.
I mean, they do literally have a seat on the state's advisory council to the New York State Office of Victim Services. There are multiple representatives for crime victims on it.
Sure. We had a bill introduced that would require one of the 7 members of the parole board to be a convicted felon, a former convicted felon.
That's not a Republican bill, to be
clear,
right?
No, it is not, and I voted no. However, where's the bill to require a crime victim to serve on that? And that's what I mean. That's not even a thought.
Well, I think people would argue, though, that the representatives or people who have ties to law enforcement who are on the parole board are de facto stand-ins for those people. And I imagine those people, if you ask them, would say, I am the voice for that crime victim. I'm going to say 10 out of 10 would claim that.
They might claim it, but we've seen the actions of this parole board, and I would disagree completely.
Okay.
But a bill was introduced for that, and that got on the agenda and was moving for a convicted felon, an ex-convicted felon to serve, but not even a thought given to having a crime victim. That's my point. Some of these bills, yes, you could say symbolic. Some of them, I think, are very substantive. One of them would redefine it or more clearly define the term strangulation for the purposes of these crimes. Another one would create a statewide victims advocate.
That's different than the existing Office of Victim Services?
Yes. It would be a particular advocate for victims. And I think it's Senator Rhodes' bill. I think he's even talking about amending it to have each county have one. Give the victims more access to an advocate that can help guide them through a little faster. The last bill was Senator Rollison's bill, which dealt with raise the age. If a crime was committed by a 16-year-old, say, that it wouldn't continually go to family court. If they went to family court the first time, the kid commits another crime, now it goes to criminal court. And then there's existing bills that we were talking about, the PROTECT Act of Senator Helming regarding bail. So that we can keep them from going back out and recommitting crimes. So in the hearings, the budget hearings last year, we had the DCJS, and it might not have been budget hearings. It was one of the hearings. DCJS commissioner was up there, and I was asking about crime stats. And I gave her an example. I said, somebody gets arrested. It's not bail eligible, so they're released without bail. They commit another crime. Same thing happens again, not bail eligible. This happens 16 times. I said, how many times do you count that? How many crimes is that? She said 1, because it wasn't fully processed. I've said, but you have 16 crime victims. Yeah, but it was only counted once. It was counted once for the purposes of recidivism. So when we see those stats and they say, well, with bail reform, recidivism's only up by 3% or something. No, it's not. It's much, much higher than that. So again, when we talk about the current system, even victims say, what do we actually believe? What is real? What is not?
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this conversation. We've been speaking with State Senator Dean Murray. He's a Long Island Republican. Senator, thanks so much for making the time.
Thank you so much.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.